The current India-America trade tariff war, escalating sharply in 2025, began when the U.S. imposed sweeping tariffs on Indian exports, initially 25%, then an additional 25% penalty, mainly due to India's continued imports of Russian oil. This tariff barrage, reaching 50%, represents one of the highest levies imposed by the U.S. on any partner, and has triggered a diplomatic and economic crisis between the two nations, straining decades of improving strategic ties aimed at counterbalancing China. India condemned the U.S. measures as unfair and asserted its strategic autonomy in energy and trade policies. The crisis has jeopardized up to 70% of India's exports to the U.S., particularly in labor-intensive sectors such as textiles, gems, jewelry, and seafood, threatening jobs and economic growth. India faces significant economic challenges from the tariff war. The 50% tariffs risk slashing Indian exports to the U.S. from $86.5 billion to about $50 billion by 2026, potentially causing a $55–60 billion direct hit to the economy. Small and medium enterprises, SMEs, heavily involved in labor-intensive sectors, are especially vulnerable due to limited capital and margins, risking large-scale job losses. The tariffs also undermine India's aspirations to become a major manufacturing hub and challenge the government's efforts toward domestic economic reforms and export growth. Currency depreciation and diverted export orders to ASEAN countries with lower tariffs add further strain. The tariff imposition is disrupting long-standing diplomatic cooperation. Historically, the U.S.-India relationship has strengthened over shared strategic interests, including defense, energy, and the Quad Alliance. However, U.S. tariffs were perceived by India as punitive and tied unfairly to its independent foreign policy decisions, notably its energy ties with Russia. Reports of India halting some U.S. defense procurements, though denied officially, illustrate rising diplomatic friction. The trade standoff has strained trust, potentially complicating joint regional security initiatives. Conversely, India's rejection of diplomatic overtures, including a missed U.S. dinner invitation for Prime Minister Modi and stiff post-tariff rhetoric, highlights the deep diplomatic rift. India maintains a stance of strategic autonomy, refusing to bow to U.S. trade pressures while emphasizing self-reliance and domestic economic resilience. The tariff war has paradoxically strengthened India's resolve to assert its independent foreign policy and diversify global partnerships. India seeks to balance ties with the U.S., Russia, and even China, as evidenced by recent thawing in India-China relations following border disputes and economic cooperation gestures. Strategically, India remains a key player in the Indo-Pacific but is wary of overdependence on any single global power, hence its pragmatic openness to multiple alliances. Strengths: India's large and diverse economy, strategic geopolitical position, growing domestic market, and increasing self-reliance initiatives bolster its resilience. Its IT and services sectors, largely unaffected by U.S. goods tariffs, provide a strong economic cushion. Weaknesses: heavy dependence on exports to the U.S. in labor-intensive sectors like textiles and gems, vulnerability of SMEs, and challenges in rapidly adjusting supply chains amid tariffs expose economic risks. Opportunities: potential to pivot towards alternative markets, boost domestic manufacturing under Make in India, and leverage comparative advantages against more heavily tariffed Asian competitors, e.g. China, Vietnam, opens new trade avenues. Threats: sustained high U.S. tariffs could depress export revenues, provoke job losses, deter foreign investment, and weaken India's growth momentum, while also exacerbating diplomatic tensions that could impact broader strategic cooperation. In summary, the India-America trade tariff war of 2025 has evolved into a complex economic and diplomatic conflict affecting trade, strategic relations, and economic growth prospects. India remains firm on protecting its strategic autonomy and economic interests while navigating diplomatic tensions and seeking opportunities to recalibrate its global trade and diplomatic posture. The consequences will shape the economic and geopolitical landscape of both countries and their regional alliances for years to come.